Aloha! Thanks so much for joining me again in our live virtual classroom. My name is Robin. I'm the Education Manager at Pacific Whale Foundation. I'm so happy to see you or have you seeing me today. As always, our live virtual classrooms, our goal is to learn a little something and hopefully have some fun and have an activity that you can join in and conduct at home with me. So that said, if you haven't seen the materials list yet for today, here it is. And for this one, really just about anything is fine. You can be super creative with your materials. A tall container filled with water is going to be helpful to kind of experiment with what we create today. I recommended something like a pitcher. That's what I'm using, something fairly tall and kind of wide too, so we have some space to work with. So get creative in your home. You could even use your sink. You could fill your sink up temporarily with water and do some testing in there. The cork, if you have a cork, that's a great thing to use. If not, something else that's similar, that's small and lightweight, like a plastic bottle cap, maybe a small plastic cup, even a toilet paper roll. Taper glue may or may not be necessary. And then just any kind of miscellaneous materials, paper clips, coins, metal washers, toothpicks, pipe cleaners, yarn, magnets, popsicle sticks, string, rubber bands. Really, you can get creative there with those things. Anything that's different weights, basically, is what we're going to be working with. And I'll explain those a little bit more later on. I'll tell you a little bit more about what we're going to be using those things for and what we'll need there. So that said, let's go ahead and get started. So today's topic is plankton, and that's one of my favorite things to talk about, so I'll try to contain my excitement so that we can get to what we need to do. But first of all, let's make sure we're all on the same page. We've all probably heard the word before. Maybe you've heard of Sandy Plankton, they mentioned in Finding Nemo, or Sheldon Plankton from SpongeBob SquarePants. You may think, oh, one of the things humpback whales eat is plankton. So some familiarity, but what does it actually mean? What is plankton and why should we care? Why are they important? So first of all, let's start with the name. Plankton comes from the Greek planktos, which means wanderer or drifter, and that's exactly what plankton do. So they are organisms that are not able to move against ocean currents or travel long distances. So they can, in some cases, move on their own, but more so they're drifting. They're not able to, again, travel against the ocean currents. And they come in all shapes and sizes, and that's kind of our focus for today. So they can be so small that we can't see them with the naked eye, and that's one of the reasons I have a microscope here next to me. We are going to get to that microscope. They can be of sizes that we can see them. So for example, one of the things that humpback whales like to eat, krill, is considered a form of plankton, but we certainly can see those with our naked eye. So I'm going to bring my krill block a little closer here so you can see those, you get an idea of their size. But as they are drifters, they are considered plankton. So if we think about plankton as a whole, they can be divided into two different groups. They can be divided into phytoplankton, which are tiny plants, and zooplankton, which are tiny animals. And phytoplankton are actually so small that not only can we not see them with the naked eye, but we can't even see them with this type of microscope that I have here today. So I want to talk about why they're so important, especially, but then we'll switch our focus to zooplankton for the rest of our morning together, our time together. So phytoplankton, there's a lot of reasons why they're important. And if you're interested in this topic, I really recommend you take some time and dive into this after our time together this morning. But a couple of the reasons that I want to focus on, one is that phytoplankton are the base of the food chain in the ocean. So just like plants on land, they're plants in the ocean. And so everything that lives in the ocean, either directly or indirectly, gets their energy from phytoplankton. So either they eat phytoplankton, or they eat something that eats phytoplankton, or they eat something that eats something that eats something that eats phytoplankton. You get the point. So they're very, very important. If there were no phytoplankton, eventually there would be no other life in the ocean either. Another reason that they're important, just like plants on land, they produce oxygen. And of course, we like oxygen because that's what we breathe. So plants, and phytoplankton included, take in carbon dioxide, which is what we breathe out, and then they breathe out or produce oxygen, which is what we breathe in. And phytoplankton are actually responsible for about half of the oxygen that we breathe. So they're not just super important to the whole food chain and to life in the ocean, but they're also important to life on land and breathing for us. So super, super important. And of course, all connected are all living things. And so we'll move on to the zooplankton. And those are those tiny animals, those animal plankton. And that can be divided into two more groups. And those groups are called holoplankton and meroplankton. And the difference, at least for me to remember the difference, is actually in the names. Holoplankton spend their whole life as plankton, and meroplankton begin their lives as plankton, and then they grow into a different form as adults. So to familiarize us with some plankton and some things maybe that start off their lives as meroplankton that we didn't even know started off their lives as plankton, I wanted to use something that I'm hoping is familiar for all or for most of us. So I think regardless of age, we all hopefully have some sort of familiarity with SpongeBob SquarePants. So I actually put together some pictures over here that I wanted to show you of some of the characters from SpongeBob. So they're in that column on the left over there. And in the middle column is an image of what they would look like as plankton. So of course, instead of a cartoon, a real life image. And most of them are meroplankton, meaning they only start their lives as plankton, and then they grow into something different as an adult. And so that's the picture that's in the column on the far right. Of course, you get to see a real life version as opposed to a cartoon version. The very last character here, Sheldon Plankton, is the exception. He is a holoplankton. So he spends his whole life as plankton. He always looks the same. And he is something called a copepod. And copepods, there are lots and lots of those in the ocean. And we're going to look at a live sample of plankton today, and we are likely to see lots of those too. So the way that we can identify them pretty easily is by their two long antennae, which you can see on Sheldon Plankton. He also has those, and an eye right in the center. So all of the other ones are things that we're probably pretty familiar with: sponges, sea stars, squid, crabs, and fish. But we may not have known that they started off their lives as plankton. So in fact, a lot of the things, or a majority of the things that we see when we go snorkeling, start off their lives as plankton. So that's something that we may not have known. And so here in the Hawaiian Islands, in the samples that I collect, that's usually what we see. We see a lot of copepods, and so we might see some other holoplankton, things that spend their whole lives as plankton. But we often see a lot of plankton that grow into the things that we see when we're snorkeling. So we would call that their larval form. So we're going to take a look at a live sample today before we get to our activity. So our activity today is going to be a design challenge. We're going to create our own plankton using all those random materials I mentioned before. So we want to get a look at plankton. We want to see what sizes and shapes they come in, what characteristics they have. So we're going to take a look at a live sample that I collected this morning. So if you're wondering, how does one collect a live sample of plankton? I can show you a little bit of that process and some of the tools that I use. So this right here is a plankton net. So this is the net that I use to collect the plankton. So this goes in the ocean. This can be dragged behind a boat to do some collection, or for myself this morning, I just brought it over to the beach and I dragged it behind me for a little while. And it is a net, which means it does have holes in it. I'm going to try to bring it a little bit closer here so you can see, hopefully, or maybe you won't see, because it's very difficult to see the holes in this net. So plankton are pretty small, and again, we have a microscope we're going to use. So if we want to catch something small, we need a net with holes smaller than what we're trying to catch. So it is difficult to see the holes in this net. But it does have holes in it, and so for the most part, the only thing that gets through that net is actually water. So our plankton get trapped inside, and anything that might be in the path of the net would also get trapped inside. So I'm going to show you a quick video of what that looks like. Now this is a time-lapse video, so it's much faster than what was actually happening. I actually moved very slowly through the water my goal is not to stir up any sand. And the area that I'm doing this is pretty calm. If you can see, the waves are breaking quite a ways out past where I am. So it's fairly calm near shore, so I can have a nice spot to collect my plankton, try not to get too much sand in there. So I drag that back and forth. I think maybe I did about 4 passes this morning with the net. And then when I'm all finished, I bring the net back to shore and I unscrew this end off of the net. And this is where all of the plankton have been collected with just a bit of seawater. And I pour it out into my collection container. And I use these little glass jars as my collection container. So now, and I can see them all zipping around right now. So they are pretty small, and some, again, we can't see with our naked eye. Some we can. Of course, the microscope gives us a closer look. So just to give you an idea of what I was seeing in that jar, here's a little video of some of what's happening in the jar there. So hopefully, you may not be able to tell what you're looking at, but hopefully you can see lots of movement in there. And those are all plankton. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at some of this sample in the microscope. And as much as I would love to sit and identify every single plankton that we see, I can lose hours looking at this. All we want to do is really get an idea of what different shapes and sizes they come in and what characteristics we have. So I want you to look at the sample with me and make some observations and try to keep these things in mind, remembering that we're going to be creating our own plankton in just a little while. So to get started, I'm going to bring my sample a little closer to me. I have it on a white sheet of paper so that I can see a little bit better. It's tricky to know what I'm getting when I take a little bit of the sample, but I'm hoping that I can show you guys some exciting things. And of course, it is a live sample, so they are going to be moving. Let's see, I don't think I got anything in there. So I'm using a pipette here. So I'm going to take some sample out using the pipette and put it into this petri dish here for us to look at on the microscope. And I don't want to put too much in here because then it'll be difficult for us to see. So hopefully we got something in there. I'm going to go ahead and put this under the microscope. And I'm going to switch the view to directly from the microscope. There's a camera right here, so that'll show you the same thing that I can see in the microscope. And I'm going to have to move this around a little bit and work on the focus to see what we can find in our sample. Here we go. Here's one. Now keep in mind this is a live sample, so they are going to be moving around. Looks like this one's staying still, which is nice for us. I'm going to get, while you're looking at that one, you see some other small plankton swimming by. I'm going to try to get another sample ready in another petri dish here and switch that for you because it didn't look like there was very much in there. And I want to give you an opportunity to see all of the different shapes and sizes, or maybe not all, I should say, but as many as we can of the different types of plankton here. Believe it or not, there is depth to this water, at least for plankton, given their size. So I have to switch the focus frequently, depending on where they are in our water droplets here. So lots and lots of movement. So try to really observe some different features. Do you see fins? Do you see spines? Do they look hairy? What's happening there? What do you see? Apologize for all the motion, but with a live sample, it helps to move it around as they move so we can see different things in our sample. So notice you can see the eyes on some of them. Some have 2 eyes. Okay, so I'll leave those on there for just a little bit longer. Watch some of those move around. And I'm going to get one more sample. going to swap our samples now. I'm going to bring on one more. You may notice these guys are very fast. Very fast moving. There we go. So we've got quite a few in view right now in all different sizes. That's a good one. I'll leave that there for just another minute. And while I'm leaving that there, I will mention, I hope that this goes without saying, but you can feel free to use the live chat. If you have questions at any time, I'm more than happy to answer them for you. And I may occasionally ask a question or two and ask you for a response in the live chat. So please feel free to use that and interact with me. So I'm going to move just to one more spot in our sample. Okay, so hopefully you've gotten a good look at some of those plankton. And again, we weren't able to identify all of them, but just see some of the differences in sizes and shapes and all of those different characteristics. As I said before, I love to spend lots of time looking through samples and identifying them. So I picked out a few from my test sample the other day that I wanted to show you just because I was able to isolate one or a few fairly well. This one right here is a fish larva. And so one of the ways that we can tell, they have two eyes and a spinal cord, a distinct spinal cord. You can see really well there when it lays on its side. And now that it's upright again, you can see it moves its tail from side to side, just like all fish do, as opposed to up and down like marine mammals. Another one that I thought was really cool is this. I've never seen this before, and I'm going to be honest, I don't know what it is. But I always get especially excited when I see something new that I haven't seen before. And then this image here are some of my favorites. There's something called polychaete worms or fireworms in their adult form. There's a couple of them in here, and you can see they move kind of like inchworms or caterpillars, and quite a few other plankton in there as well. So I know we didn't get to spend too much time looking into the sample, but just to get an idea of what some of the different plankton look like and some of their characteristics. So now we can get back to our activity, we can get back to our challenge, which is to design our own plankton. But we're not just doing a craft, we're not just going to make it look like a plankton, we want to make it behave like a plankton too. So one thing that we need to know is a little bit more about their behavior. So now I have a question for you that I would like you to send me answers in the chat if you have one. Do you think that plankton want to float, that they want to stay at the surface, at the top all the time? Do you think they want to sink so they're at the bottom all the time? Or do you think they want to flink? You think they want to stay right in the middle? So if you can put that in the chat, top, bottom, or middle, or float, sink, or flink, I want to know what you think plankton want to do or where they want to be. And while I'm waiting for the delay to catch up and for answers here, I can explain flink. I was taught this by one of my teachers somewhere along the way, and I came to understand it as a normal term that I thought everybody knew. But now I'm realizing that may or may not be the case. So flink is just a combination of floating and sinking. So it's not floating and it's not sinking. It's hanging out right in the middle. So flinking. So I want to know what you think plankton do. Do you think that they float? Do you think that they sink? Or do you think that they flink? Do you think that they want to be in the middle? So, hoping to see some responses. What we think plankton do. And that's going to help us when we get to our design challenge, because we're going to design our plankton to do what real plankton do. So, all right, I'm gonna start to give it away. It wasn't a trick question. I know I do ask a lot of trick questions, but there wasn't really only one right answer there. As for most organisms that live in the ocean, it's usually not pretty safe to stay at the top all the time where everything can see you and easily get to you. But for something like phytoplankton, since they need sunlight to get energy, since they're plants, they do need to be near the surface. They do need to be able to float. And anything like some of the zooplankton that eat phytoplankton also need to be able to float to be in that area to eat. Oh, there we go. Thank you. I'm so glad I see the responses. I apologize. The delay is pretty long. So in some ways, any answer can be correct. So I see sink there. They don't want to stay at the surface all the time, so they do want to sink, but they don't want to sink all the way at the bottom. They don't want to stay at the bottom either. And some plankton actually move to different depths every single day. They make something called a vertical migration. So they spend the day in the deeper water where it's darker, and then at night they move up higher in the water column. I see a blink response now. Thank you. So they want to do some sort of in-between, some combination of all of these things, or have the ability to choose. So taking that to our design challenge, what we want to do is make a plankton that doesn't stay floating all the time and that doesn't sink quickly to the bottom. We want to make a plankton that either, we have a few options here because this is a challenge. We want to make one that flinks, so that does stay right in the middle, it doesn't float and it doesn't sink. Or we want to make one that sinks very, very slowly. And this is an extra challenge that I hadn't previously included, but I think some of us might be up for it, is to make one that can make a vertical migration. So initially it will sink, and then it will return back up to the surface again. So in doing that, that's where we need our materials now. So I was trying to get some of my other tools out of the way so I can bring my materials here onto the table. So I've gathered some things already. So most importantly, you need something to make the body of your plankton. And if you've already gathered your materials and you have ideas, go ahead and start making your plankton. As I've mentioned before, I always do test runs. I want to make sure everything can go smoothly before I ask you to do these things. So I have done a test run before, and I'll share that one with you before I close today. But you can go ahead and get started on building yours now. So the first thing you need is something that can be the body. So I did use a cork on my test run. That's a nice small light object. A plastic bottle cap would also work well. I've done some experimenting with a little plastic cup here. A toilet paper roll. These don't last so long in the water, but it will serve the purpose. It will work. If you want to decorate the body of your plankton, you could start on that now. And I have my pitcher of water that I'll bring out onto the table, but I'll keep over to the side for now. So this was a good height and a good width for me. But again, if you don't have something like that, you could put some water temporarily in the sink and try to test it there. If you're making something small enough, you might be able to use a glass for drinking, or a cup, or a large deep bowl. So get creative. And I recommend doing some experimentation with whatever you're using for the body of your plankton. So when I tried to do a test run with this cup, I said, okay, well, I know that it floats, right? So I know I'm going to need to use some of the other objects to give it some weight, but I don't want to make it sink right to the bottom. And I was thinking that it would sink if it filled with water. So I tried it, and I don't know how well you can see in here, but I'm hoping you can kind of see into my picture. I thought that when I let the cup fill with water, it would sink, but it did not. It actually stays floating. So maybe you can see it a little bit better now. So I definitely need to use some weight. So I recommend doing some experimentation with your body before you build anything entirely, and experiment with the weight. I have a little towel here. I forgot to mention that whenever I do things with water, I like to have a towel around so I don't make too much of a mess. Also, I didn't fill my pitcher all the way to the top. I stopped a couple inches from the top so that when I stick my hand in to retrieve my plankton, it doesn't spill everywhere. So I might recommend that too. So my cup, I know it still floats even when it's full of water, so I need more weight to make it sink. So I have some change here. I have some coins I was using as weight. So I put a couple coins inside, and I let it fill with water, and it still sinks right to the bottom. Or now I shouldn't say it sinks. it's not still, but it sinks right to the bottom. So lots of experimentation is needed. Think about some of your materials you have and some of the characteristics plankton have. Is there a way to give them fins? Is there a way to give them arms, appendages? Is there a way to give them spines? So I'm going to jump to my sample to show you here while you guys are working, because I don't want to give away what it is to do, and there is not one right answer, and we've got a lot of options here. We can make a plankton that sinks really slowly. We can make one that flinks. And the reason that I challenged you to make one that makes a vertical migration is because I accidentally did that. I accidentally made one that makes a vertical migration. So I started with my cork, and I'll bring this a little bit closer so that you can see it. I started with my cork, and the first thing that I did was try to add weight. And so I took some change, some coins, and I attached them with a rubber band to the bottom of my cork. And I did a lot of experimentation to find out how much I needed and if it should be at both ends or which end. And then I added some spines. I used some toothpicks to add some spines. And with this final result, when I put it into my pitcher, it actually made a vertical migration. And I'm going to move my my camera real quick so you can see this, because I know you can't see in the picture where we are right now. So I'm going to take the camera away from the microscope, put it on the stand here, and make it so you can see into my picture. And I'll switch views here and watch my vertical migration. I'll do that one more time. Hopefully you can see that. So I challenge you to keep working on yours. See if you can get yours to flink, to stay right in the middle there, to sink slowly, or to make a vertical migration just like mine. And before I sign off, does anybody have any questions that they'd like answered? You can put those in the chat if you do, and I'm happy to answer those while I'm here, while I'm waiting for the delay to kick in case there are any questions. I always like to mention, I'd love to see what you come up with when you create your own plankton. I always find when working with students, you guys have so many more creative ideas than I do, things I didn't even think of. So if you're really excited about the plankton that you create and what it's able to do, take a video, share it with me, share it with our education team. We can be reached by email at education@pacificwhale.org. We'd love to see your videos. We'd love to see how this worked out for you. Also, if we end up not getting to any questions, you can send those to us and we can answer them there. Oh, I like that question. Thank you. When did you discover your love of plankton? That's kind of an interesting one for me, actually, because I think, although I love what I do, but I think I may have chosen a different career path if I discovered plankton a little bit earlier on. I really didn't get to know them well and love them until I became a teacher. One of the first professional development opportunities I did as a teacher was in a workshop called Earth through the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, and it was out here in Hawaii at University of Hawaii at Manoa. And that was kind of our focus, was marine microbes. And I found out about all the cool things that scientists learn from microbes and things that you can study about microbes. Also, as a teacher, I was able to go on a teachers aboard research ships cruise and learn even more about plankton. And I just think they're the coolest thing, and they're super, super important to the whole ocean ecosystem. And we can learn so much from them. So that's kind of how I discovered them and why I love plankton now, and I love sharing them with others. So that's a good segue for me, since I don't see any other questions. I hope you guys got a little inspired here and a little bit of love for plankton, and I really encourage you to learn a little bit more. As always with these short live virtual classrooms, we just kind of scratch the surface. So there's so much more you can learn about plankton, and so much experimentation you can do with your design challenge here. So please, if you make something cool that you're proud of, share it with us. If you have any other questions, education@pacificwhale.org. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks so much again for joining me this morning. Stay safe and healthy. Aloha.